Hello, everyone. I'm Victoria Prado. I'm Research Associate to the Founding Director at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. Our next panel will delve into the critical areas of focus for the climate transition where Brazil can play a significant role. We will begin with the panel, Critical Minerals in Brazil, a potential reliable source for global energy. We will explore how Brazil can position itself as a unique strategic partner in the global critical mineral supply chain, providing a wide and stable supply of minerals. We'll discuss how it should streamline its regulatory process and strengthen its environmental regulations. Our panels will dive into how Brazil can expand its domestic production capabilities and position itself as a key exporter, all the while navigating a complex geopolitical landscape. To lead us through this conversation, I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. Daniel Abdo, Director of Business Development at Sigma Lithium, Tom Mohrenhout, Professor at Columbia University and Critical Materials Lead at the Center on Global Energy Policy, Rachel Maia, Vale and GPA Board Member and Chairwoman of the UN Brazil Global Pact. To moderate this discussion, I'm pleased to welcome Eric Schatzker, who's the Editorial Director at Bloomberg New Economy. Please welcome and joining me. Please join me in welcoming the panelists on stage.
Well, thank you, Victoria. And I'd also like, on behalf of the panel, to thank Marina, Jorge, and Jose for organizing, or for putting together such a well-organized and clearly well-attended event. We are, as Victoria told you, here to talk about critical minerals. Critical to what, you might say? Well, they're critical to electrification, to the energy transition. It's safe to say that without nickel, copper, cobalt, lithium, and a host of other minerals, net zero carbon emissions by 2050 is a total fantasy. So this is an important subject for you all to understand and consider. I would like to begin with an anecdote. When I recently spoke to one of Donald Trump's key economic advisors about alternatives to China as a supplier of critical minerals, he mentioned, this is not Trump himself, of course, his advisor, mentioned the United States, Canada, and Europe. He didn't say Brazil. And the reality is, almost nobody does. So that's where I'd like to begin this discussion. Why is that the case? Why isn't Brazil more widely recognized as a source or even a potential source of essential raw materials for the energy transition supply chain? It is a question to all my panelists, but I'd like to begin with you, Tom.
Sure. Thank you very much. It's a very good question. Actually, if we look at what Brazil has, they have a ton underground and quite a bit of production as well, right? So when you look at reserves, commercially available reserves, commercially recoverable reserves, actually, they have a ton, and the country is very wealthy in critical minerals, right? Of course, you need to get it out of the ground. That's a little bit more difficult. There's only really one mineral where Brazil produces more, a higher share of global capacity than what they have in reserves, and that's iron ore. And obviously, Rachel can talk about that. Why people don't talk about Brazil enough? It's a lack of information, it's a lack of knowledge. Of course, a lot of people think nickel, Indonesia, cobalt, DRC, right? It's easy. Brazil actually has a lot of resources, which ironically, I think it doesn't help its case, right? Secondly, there are a factor of various reasons why I think Brazil can be a responsible producer, which maybe they haven't communicated about well enough yet, right? And that doesn't necessarily help their case as well. So it's kind of putting out your elbows with the Chiles and the DRCs and the Indonesias in the world to show, yes, maybe we have less of a share of reserves in a particular critical mineral, but we can actually exploit them. And then secondly, you started your question with mentioning your anecdote about meeting with one of the economic advisors of Donald Trump. So I think you also partially answered your own question right there.
It's possible. Danielle, Rachel, please, Rachel, tell us, share with us some of your experience. Is it mostly what Tom says? Is this a marketing problem?
Actually, I think the word, and especially these ones that you mentioned now, that not consider Brazil as a key player that start to look for the south corner of the world. We are there. We should be included and involved on the main discussion. We are part of the process. Actually, sometimes people say it's a problem that we speak Portuguese. It's a problem because we are not included in the global language, and so and so. Don't make sense at all. We have there, actually, of course, I'm here as a board director, as a Vale, and then Vale is one of the main producer of like a nickel and copper. We should be part of the main discussion, not just on Vale, on Colombia, and so and so. This is the point. Actually, sometimes we should positionate ourselves and say, you know what, the main players here, if they are not, call them. This is the point.
Daniel.
Just a compliment. Hello? Yep. Just a compliment here. I mean, it's clearly a question of marketing, right? If you think about it, as Tom mentioned, we have an abundance of resources. We have a green power grid. We have a lot of history in the mining sector. We have a government that right now is very aligned with the whole energy transition campaign. So, you know, it's a question of putting the word out there.
Okay, so let's talk about how. If it is fundamentally, in part, a marketing problem, how do you change that perception? Rachel, you said we should be part of the discussion. Well, how do you make yourself part of the discussion?
Actually, sorry, after 50, I need to think with my glass, you know. Sorry for that. Actually, being part of this discussion is talking about Agenda 2030. Being part of this discussion is talking about green transition. This is like the points that Luis Amaral just mentioned here. Decarbonization is not about like Brazil or the countries on Latin America or regarding just social impact. It's about the global impact that we must be sure that we don't have a big Earth. We don't have that like a process to thinking about how we can do that different. We have no time anymore. The decarbonization should be part as a default. Is that what should be our thoughts? Maybe we should start to deconstruct and reconstruct with this new behavior. I'm not sure if we are ready to do that right now. This is the reason why we should bring innovation. And bring Brazil to the table, it's bring innovation. That is the point.
Daniel, how would you solve the problem?
That's a big question. No, listen, again, everything that I mentioned earlier, we have this potential to become a leading provider of materials to the Northern Hemisphere, right? And that's where our focus should be on. And you're absolutely right. When we talk about critical minerals in South America, you only hear about Argentina and Chile. They've been doing it for a little bit longer than us. You know, in our sector, lithium, I mean, since we turned our plant on last year, that was the first time Brazil came into the global lithium map. So we need more of that. We need more, and you know, we are seeing a lot of support coming from government to get these things done.
Tom, it is a competitive environment. Much of what it's going to take for Brazil to land itself on people's radar screens comes down to money, investment. Help us understand that competitive dynamic. You know, how does Brazil measure up against the Chiles, the Argentinas, you know, the Americas, the Canadas, the Australias, and other parts of the world when it comes to creating the conditions necessary to attract the investment that drives the development and ultimately the exploitation of these minerals?
No, that's a very good question. There's pluses and there's sort of downsides, right? I think to focus a little bit first on the downside, I think there is an issue, like in many other countries, with permitting and granting licenses, right? Currently in Brazil, about 70,000 projects are waiting for a license.
70,000.
70,000. So when you talk to investors, they don't want to become 70,001, right? That's a scary prospect. Now, the government, to its credit then, is doing a lot of things to try to identify strategic projects, strategic minerals, and trying to help accelerate that process, right? And accelerate that process without reducing standards. I know there might be people here, rightly so, who are worried about the environmental and social impact. Quicker permitting doesn't mean that you lower your standards. Quicker permitting generally means that you get out all of the inefficiency, which there is in Brazil, which there is a ton of in the United States as well. So it's definitely not only Brazil, but I would say that is quite a critical one. Other issues that are there are the tax setup, sort of the regulatory setup that's still a little bit complicated to navigate, specifically for international investors. So those things could be improved a bit.
Rachel, I always like it when the panelists begin to chuckle and smile at what the others are saying. So tell us what's on your mind.
Yes, I'm going to share. Actually, with all respect with South America countries, but we are talking about one of the largest producer of nickel and copper. We have it there in Brazil. That we should have the capability to recognize that. We have it there in Brazil. What we should do for now on, we know we have in Brazil one of the best-in-class producer for nickel and copper. But we should look for the sustainable perspective also. How we can reduce the carbon footprint. How we can bring the sustainability way to be important on this large production of nickel class 1. For instance, we have that there in Brazil. How we can do that sustainability perspective being part of the process. And also, on the legal perspective, how we can make the reform to make the investor being more comfortable to all the process, not being like a challenger, but being part of the process that I will be there and make all my investment and so and so. This is part of this journey that we are facing now. This is the process.
Daniel, there's always room for improvement, for reform. Your company has recently been through licensing and permitting and raising capital for investment purposes in extracting lithium. That's what Sigma Lithium does. What's it been like? What would you and your colleagues like to see change in order to facilitate more of what you're doing now?
So the bottleneck is certainly licensing. It took us over 2 years to get the licenses for our phase 1, which we're currently working on. And but thankfully, this is something that is very much on the radar of the Ministry of Mines and Energy. They're very well...
At the federal level.
At the federal level. So they're very aware of that, and they've been actively trying to address that issue. Now, you raise another interesting question. In terms of fundraising, in 2018, we had to go list our company in the Toronto Stock Exchange because there was no money for lithium in Brazil. Thankfully, today, there's a lot of resources available. A couple of weeks ago, we got the green light from financing from BNDES for our expansion of phase 2. And at the same time, there is a current process going on for a critical minerals fund to fund, junior mining projects in the critical mineral space. So, this funding that used not to be available is now readily available in Brazil.
I want you to tell us a little bit about Sigma's experience because, and I'm assuming most of you aren't aware of this, over the course of the past 18, 19 months, the lithium price has crashed by about 85%. And it is somewhat obvious that any company that's active in a commodity is going to have to endure some volatility. That's a lot of volatility. What's it been like? What has it been like in the Brazilian context? How have you survived through that? And what's the outlook?
Sure. So, as I say, the cure for low prices is low prices. But jokes aside,
He was tough on the questions.
very tough, very tough. But so what are we seeing in the market right now? We're seeing a lot of our peers in other jurisdictions simply halting their operations because these prices are not sustainable. So the name of the game is low cost. And that's what we've been focusing on. And that's clearly one of the advantages in Brazil.
Why is that an advantage in Brazil?
As compared to a similar operations in Australia, for example, a truck driver makes more money than an engineer at our plant. Not only that, in terms of energy, another example from our plant, we pay 2 cents of a dollar kilowatt hour. A similar operation in Australia is about 36 cents a kilowatt hour. So there are significant gains in prices. And a testament to that, Brazil has become an important landmark for critical minerals is a recent acquisition of Latin Resources by Pilbara. That is one of the main players of hard rock lithium in Australia. So we're seeing Australian players moving to different jurisdictions so that they can survive this low price environment.
That's, I take it the point is that's a validation of Brazil's competitive position in the lithium market.
Yeah, low cost can be a challenge too, Eric, because in challenger perspective, government is still like in a process to reform. Actually, infrastructure can be a challenger, increase cost, but we should play as a low cost. This is something that we should take into consideration also, because we cannot ignore that like we are in a process of like a green transition, but in the same time we should deal with like the fact that marked sometime crash, and then that's what happened. And then, like, despite we are doing the energy transition, for instance, copper can be very important for you in lithium, to nickel and so. How we are learning of this mineral, it's so important in our life space. Like, for instance, if we do not have these two minerals, how we can deal with the energetic transition? We are not going to deal without them. So we need companies working out, of course, reduce the footprint of the decarbonization, the limit of the forest, and so. But without these two minerals, the life will be very hard to make the transition, this green transition.
Just another element as well. I mean, not only low cost, but you need to have traceability, because there's tons of untraceable product out there, low cost.
We'll come back to traceability a little bit later, but before we get there, I want to focus again on the word critical. We're talking about critical minerals, but that word, critical, is a useful one because these minerals aren't just critical any longer to the energy transition. These minerals are increasingly seen as critical to national security. So, Tom, I'd like you to help us talk a bit about Brazil's role as a critical mineral supplier in a geopolitical context.
Yeah, I think the geopolitical context is one of the real drivers here where we might see actually Brazil interacting or more interacting with players like the United States and Europe than they are today, right? I think, firstly, we need to look at where are we today, right? And if you think, for example, about nickel exports with the latest available data that we have, that's about 30 million to the United States, 100 million to China, right? If you take lithium, 1 million to the United States, more than $300 million US annual value to China, right? So I think what is currently not sufficiently realized in Washington, D.C. is actually that Brazil, and I would say Latin America more broadly, is pivoting towards China, and it makes a lot of sense. It is where their offtake is coming from, right? Which is everything in basically managing a business. It is where investment is coming from as well. And there is a slowing realization within the US that they need to look to other countries, among which Brazil as well. But it's a complicated one. Why is that? Is because basically we're in a pendulum swing for the United States and for Europe from getting everything from China to we want to onshore everything, right? Including critical mineral production as well. So you have the government in the US through different policies and incentives and so forth, that's trying to incentivize critical minerals production here, or at least in North America, and at best, plus its FTA partners, the partners with which is as a free trade agreement. They don't have that with Brazil yet, right? And so this is...
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah, absolutely. That's why I mentioned yet, because there's a realization both within Democratic parties, and I took a snub at Trump, but even with the Republicans that I speak with in DC, there is a realization we're going to need to engage with other countries that we don't currently have FTAs with, if we want to win, or not just win, but balance out that role that China is playing in global supply chains.
You're absolutely right, of course. The United States, Europe, the UK, Canada, Australia, Japan, they're all reevaluating their supply chain vulnerabilities. And they're actively looking, as you say, to reshore or to nearshore key resources and also value-added manufacturing in those industries. So what specifically do those efforts, what implications, I guess, specifically do those efforts have for Brazil as a potential partner? Is Brazil the country they're looking to, or are they looking elsewhere?
So they are looking to Brazil, but there's challenges with Brazil as well. Let's take lithium as an example, right? The US has a lot of lithium. They're trying to support projects that are using new technologies or other projects. The government is actively involved in that, and that's kind of what we want. Finally, an industrial policy focusing on your supply chain, right? If today the US conducts a critical minerals agreement with Brazil, and lithium comes in, you're going to have US suppliers that are saying, or allied suppliers, we don't want that. Right? So there is a great business case to have Brazil in there when you are a rational actor who thinks systemically. But from the moment you take into account vested interests or the way policies are designed right now to incentivize certain other producers, that becomes a much more complicated
Daniel, you're the lithium guy. Your perspective? And if I'm not mistaken, up until now, Sigma has been selling 100% of its production to China, correct?
No.
No, I'm wrong.
Yeah.
It's not just I'm wrong. There's some data that I were consulting that are wrong too, so.
No, so listen, Brazil is an important trading partner to China, to the US, Europe, right? We sell our product to anyone. We've sold it to a Chinese refiner, we sold it to Glencore, recently we sold it to LG, we sold it to Mitsubishi. The thing is that whoever buys our product, we sell a pre-chemical, needs to send it to China for refining. So Brazil is a neutral country, so we don't have any issues doing business with all these nations.
Rachel, Vale, as many people know, has a very close relationship with China, not just as a raw material supplier for more than 50 years, in fact, dating back to 1973, but as a partner in that country's plans to decarbonize its heavy industry. Tell us, I have to imagine that this conversation takes place inside the Vale boardroom. What role are geopolitics playing or having an influence over your company's strategy for developing and commercializing its critical minerals resources?
Again, you're tricky. Yeah, actually, as everybody knows here, actually, I'm part of board director. And this subject should be part of the board director strategy. But more than that, I'm going to push a little bit for sustainability way. We should be talking about being part of this deal globally, because Vale is a global key player for all this change. Again, because all that we have to offer to the global, but the way that we are doing, we should bring the way and show to the market that we have to inspire the government, because we have the issues with the license and so, but inspire the market that we have to respect the environmental impact, bring this respect for the environmental impact, for social impact, bring diversity for all the leadership position, for respecting the biodiversity and so. I think we bring to the table a different discussion. Not the same anymore. Not just how we can do the best deal. We are not just talking about how we can have the best game in the table. We are talking about how we can make this environment be well, but with the right impact, social and also for the environmental. I will never will be tired to repeat that. We should be part of the strategic way, but also be part of the executive way to understand how they are doing with that. Because sometimes the investor want to know that. And then we are the translator to the investor. But we sometimes too far, and then we don't know how to translate that. So we don't know how to tell them how copper is so important for the transition, for the electrification, and then we can take out the fossil fuel from the table, and then doing things like that. This is, Eric, is the really importance that we are talking about business, but more than talking about business, we are talking about impact.
Without question. But I would make the point, I suppose, that even questions around stability and reaching ambitious targets, such as net zero carbon emissions by 2050, these days are infected, we could say, by geopolitical interests, concerns. How does a company that wants to make an impact, that wants to put sustainability first, navigate those tricky waters?
It's a very tricky water because the framework for this navigation, we do have the implication for the license, for all the bureaucracy. We do have the implication for the cost. And this going direct to the investor, make like being a geopolitical discussion, not just a business or global market discussion. This is the reason why the government and global market should be sitting together to have this geopolitical discussion and make Brazil attract. If not, we continue to be, there is too much bureaucratical, and then we don't want to deal with that.
Tom, Rachel is, of course, absolutely correct. As we've established, Brazil does need to attract more investment. China has become a major financier of Brazilian infrastructure and energy investment. Is there potentially a zero-sum aspect to this, which is to say, the more China invests, the less the U.S. will, or the less the West will in Brazil?
I want to. That's a good way of. I need to watch my words now. I think what. Not immediately, but it's definitely a risk on the horizon. I think markets are being pulled apart, right? Whoever says that this is not the case, especially when it comes to specifically critical minerals and energy transition supply chains, I don't think is paying attention to the data and to what we're actually seeing, right? I think for the US, it's almost impossible to imagine that they would not at one point try to deliver a counterweight against Chinese investment in the region as a whole, right? And I think we can hope that that counterweight will be something much more balanced, much more productive than the history of our backyard, because the backyard is long gone, right? And is not coming back anymore. Whether, and this will be a much more complicated one, whether basically mineral-rich countries who are in the middle, who like doing business with China, who like doing business with the US, will continue to be allowed to do that without any repercussions on other type of deals, that is where it becomes a lot more complicated. And we're seeing that today. There is some type of ticking bomb under the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, and that is Chinese investment in Mexico. There is a lot of complaints of the US with respect to Morocco. That is because of Chinese investment in the battery supply chain in Morocco. So the idea that Brazil would remain immune to that, I think is false.
Daniel, Rachel is absolutely right. At the core of this conversation about critical minerals is the question of sustainability and decarbonization. And one of Brazil's potential selling points as a critical mineral supplier is this ESG appeal, in part because Brazil, something north of 90% of Brazil's electricity grid is clean power. Tell us why, in Sigma's experience, proof of sustainability, proof of traceability, which you mentioned before, is so important.
Sure. So we call our product Quintuple Zero Green Lithium. There's a little bit of marketing for you. So, and why is that? We have zero tailing dams. We use zero hazardous chemicals. We do not use drinking water. We do not use dirty energy. And we are net zero. We achieved that right on the offset from our operations because our carbon footprint is only at our mining operations in terms of diesel used in the trucks and the explosives that we use in the operations. But along with that, you have the social perspective that is very important. And we've seen in other jurisdictions, operations being driven out by communities. So when we think about social, we don't believe in doing donations. What we really believe is creating opportunities for the people in these communities to grow as we grow. So for example, during the pandemic, we brought a microcredit program for female entrepreneurs in the region. And we're talking about one of the poorest regions in Brazil. So things of that nature is what really round out the story. We have the operational nature, but also the social impact.
Rachel, I'd like you to help us finish here by telling this audience why they should perhaps be hopeful that Brazil will achieve this objective of becoming a more recognized and important player in the global critical minerals supply chain, and in doing so, play a bigger role in the planet's decarbonization.
Because we do have all value resource over there. We have all the green resource over there. But we should share our knowledge about how is important sustainability. Sustainability should be the corner, should be more than the main point, should be the main pillar of the discussion. Also, environment impact, social impact should be part of the discussion. If not, we cannot just talk about EBITDA. We should talk about EBITDA and sustainability. If not, we are with the wrong discussion.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time, thank you for your attention, and please join me in thanking our panelists.